Michell Zappa. Nice to see you all the way from Sao Paulo, Brazil. We appreciate you coming in today. Let me just rattle off your awesome background. Michell Zappa helps people and organizations think about possible futures. His work is about making sense of the technological ecosystem by mapping and tracking how it develops in order to bring forth more equitable futures. Michell works with policy and decision makers worldwide on technology strategy. He's a futurist, information designer, and founder. His work aims to illustrate the implications of accelerating change and facilitate a higher level of awareness about our relationship to technology. Founding Envisioning Technology Foresight Institute in 2001 after publishing a series of speculative infographics. He has supported development since day one. He's devised methodologies and research frameworks for the future. Thanks a lot, Michelle. Really appreciate you being here. Please take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, it's been a decade, not two quite yet. So since 2011, we've been at this, and of course, you're very present in the history of the company, and we'll talk about that in a second. So thanks again for your attention, and thanks for being here. I'm not an expert on space by any stretch of the imagination, so I'll be bringing in what we can hopefully call an enthusiast's perspective on what's going on, and hopefully rally some interest around building something together. So Envisioning is a technology foresight institute, and the objective of the conversation here today is to start sort of garnering interest around building a collective intelligence platform. It's something we've been doing in other around the space economy. So it's something we've been doing for other topics and sets of challenges, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. But I think the stated objective is how can we work together in using all of these insights and intelligence of all types towards building something that is more sustainable and equitable. So I'm founder and CEO of Envisioning. I've been at this for, as I mentioned, about a decade, and I've always tried making sense of the near future. I think it's something that I've been drawn to my whole life. There's always a sci-fi bend in how I go about it, and but at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is to make sense, or to bring I want to say, a degree of metrics or data to what we see going on in technology. Technology is oftentimes hyped. It's easy to get caught up in its possibility. And what we're trying to do as an organization is to bring a data layer to what's going on in emerging technology and then convey that to decision makers of all types. Envisioning is a fully global and distributed organization. There was very little adaptation after COVID. Thankfully, we've been remote since day one, and we're big on publishing and giving away our research as much as possible, licensed as Creative Commons and variations thereof. And we try to bring this degree of rationalism to how we look at technology. This photo taken a couple of weeks ago now, over the Bund in Shanghai, where each dot on that QR code is a drone flying over the river, and then composing what effectively is a piece of advertising, because you're meant to scan the QR code and you see ads on your phone, or it takes you to a promo page. Well, why am I showing this? Because this is not the kind of technology we're about. I mean, this is part of the technological ecosystem, and this is some hype often gets more attention than non-hyped things by definition, and this is not our angle at all. We want to be rational and have and promote a level-headed approach for tracking and making sense of what's going on, including the ability to talk about progress in a cohesive manner. And I can't present without name dropping James Burke's Connections as one of the key sources of inspiration in doing what we're doing. But I think what Connections did wonderfully in the 70s is, if you haven't watched it, by all means you should. It's on YouTube, it's on archive.org. And what James Burke did with Connections is they as a team, they highlighted the intricate relationships that exist between innovations of different types, and how innovation will often jump from one field to another, and that's something that's sort of core in how we approach our research, and we'll break that down a little bit more when we get to the actual specifics in a second. And my dialogue with Michael began about a decade ago as well, after publishing a couple of speculative infographics. Envisioning began as a couple of subjective and speculative infographics about the near future, where I tried making sense of what I saw going on, and then tried extrapolating on how those futures, technological futures, could possibly unfold. And you'll see that the second last column in this particular infographic is about space, and this is when Michael and I connected. He reached out early on with his own take on how these particular technologies might unfold in the near future. And ever since, we've been figuring out ways to build out this collective approach together. And we've had, as a company, we've had the privilege of working with organizations, both in the private sector, in trying to bring insight into innovation and technology happening in certain fields and industries, but mostly in the public sector, with doing horizon scanning and helping public agencies make sense of what's happening in, say, key areas of the economy, or domains that are relevant to their particular challenge as an agency. And we'll talk about one of these in depth in a minute, which is with the GIZ, the German Corporation for International Collaboration. And we'll explain the work we've been doing with them. So it's a great privilege to work with organizations like these. And what we're trying to bring to the table is always this measured and data-driven approach to talking about technology. And we do that by tracking technology, scouting them, we call it research, contextualizing them, putting them into stories and narratives, which we call content. And we do that using our own tools and visualization methods, which is what we call the platform. And another piece of James Burke, or his thoughts, I came across this phrase recently, and I felt it really resonated with what we're trying to talk about here today. So if you understand something today, that means it must already be obsolete. And I think that speaks to what we're trying to do, which is tracking a moving target. Technology is constantly advancing, it's constantly developing, it's constantly leveling up in some respect. And knowing where it's at right now means your information is probably old. And that's something we've been trying to solve systematically by building out these platforms, because technology moves in a certain direction. It progresses over time. It becomes more accessible. It becomes more interconnected. It becomes faster and faster due to underlying power laws and observations like Moore. And I think so it's with this in mind that we try helping others figure out what will be possible in the near future. And we do that specifically by isolating technologies, documenting them, tracking them, assessing them using various metrics. We'll talk about TRL in a second, but the underlying approach that we bring is trying to put every conceivable technology into a preset framework or logic using our various research tools. We do that obviously aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. So every technology is tracked according or tagged according to which SDG it helps address. And we use a lot of data visualization, which I'll show on screen share in a second. And we consider ourselves as having a broad mandate in tracking these technologies. We talk a lot about emerging tech, but what defines or rather, where the boundaries for what can be considered emerging, as those boundaries are fairly fuzzy, we try being as inclusive as possible in what goes into the database, especially so we can develop this ability to track dependencies between one technology and the other. And this is sort of highlighted here as between plows and space elevators, obviously. But this is meant to bring home the point that we don't consider only the cutting edge to be technological, much on the contrary. I think Alan Kay says technology is everything invented after you were born. And that's a little bit of the bias that we're trying to undo in our approach of tracking technology. And we believe strongly in that imagination informs innovation. So within imagination, everything is possible. Within imagination, you have a broad almost unlimited set of possibilities, whereas in innovation, you're confined to what can actually happen within, say, the realms of physics and economics. But there is a relationship nonetheless. This, of course, is the communicator from Star Trek's original series, which became one source of inspiration for the flip phone, and eventually the smartphones. And there are countless, numerous examples of how science fiction informs science fact. And the reason we bring this up is because the key metric that we look at when assessing any given piece of technology is its readiness level. So TRL is probably I'll assume that most of you are familiar with it, but for the benefit of those who aren't, I'll talk through the basic premise of how TRL assessment works, which is basically you attribute a number from 1 to 9 to any given piece of technology or technology application, depending on its degree of maturity. And then you can slice and dice those, you can group those scores according to various ways of blocking them. So in our case, we look at it from technologies beginning as concepts, that's a very low TRL, turning into proofs of concept, then they're validated, tested as prototypes before finally becoming products. The approach to TRL varies per industry. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is bring a systematic way of measuring it, including, let's say, triangulating how different experts look at the maturity level of any given piece of technology at any given time, and then tracking those various scores over time, and hopefully at some point being able to predict how quickly, or rather how they might unfold in the near future. It's not only measuring the rate of change, which is something we're starting to do now, but also predicting how they might unfold in the near future. And specifically, I want to talk about our efforts into building out platforms. And these platforms are systems for collectively tracking technological progress in any given piece, in any given field or topic. And we're going to showcase a specific project done around sustainable development, which is something we launched a couple of weeks ago. But we want to use this as a springboard, as a starting point to doing something similar around the space economy. We believe that there are, we see what's going on, affectionately called the billionaires in space. We think that's great, but we also think there's plenty of space for others to be part of this transition into a new economy that we see going on. And that's the angle I think that's a primary purpose of what we want to present here, is how can we start leveraging that interest and build out something together. And I'll dive into, well, actually, I'm going to switch the screen share here. So I'll do a quick showcase of the project we launched only a couple of weeks ago. And this project was done in collaboration with the German Corporation for International Collaboration, or their International Development Fund, called GIZ. And here we're primarily looking at technologies for sustainable development. And so everything I've discussed thus far is present in this platform, and the platform is live and public and freely available. I'll drop the link in the chat in a second, but it's on here, techdetector.de. So what we're doing here is we're trying to give a comprehensive view of what's going on, of the technologies being developed for, or rather technologies and the relationship to sustainable development at large. So there are a few ways of organizing these insights. We can, a different entry point. So we can start with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, as one perspective. All 17 are listed. We can take something like eliminating hunger, and then seeing the different stories, technologies, technological applications that are relevant to that particular SDG. That's one approach. Another approach is we're creating a lot of original sci-fi to give context to the technologies presented in the research. And these original pieces of sci-fi are meant to help bring to life how the technologies might be used in the near future, and hopefully help direct the decision-making process today about which technologies that either the GIZ or any of their stakeholders should be investing in. And all of our data, or rather all of our research, is data-driven in the sense of that we collect various metrics. We've talked about TRL. So using this visualization layer, we can pull up the technology with the lowest TRL according to, from this perspective. So Perovskite solar cells would still be within proof of concept. Again, from this point of view of sustainable development, as opposed to 3D slicing software, automatic legislative tracking, technologies that are fully um, developed on the TRL scale. So, but to complement that, you could argue that that's an objective measure or global measure, TRL, but we complement that with other aspects around that are much more subjective and much more field dependent. And that's a little bit of how I want to lean on that a little bit, and how we look at the platform as potential solution for tracking technologies within the space economy. Because what we've been able to do with the GIZ is to assess the technologies according to various sustainability metrics. So without getting too bogged down in the details of this particular platform, we can pull up a technology like social programming matching databases. And then not only do we know that it's a fully TRL9, but also that the sustainability impact of this particular technology as assessed by internal stakeholders from this organization is largely positive, and this is how those scores break down. And for a few of these, we have something similar around gender metrics. So not only how sustainable the technology is, but also how it affects gender balance in the economy at large. And this is meant to be a general insight about how we can identify relevant data points around each technology. And our underlying interest, once again, or our intent with this, is to create let's call it a level playing field, or a shared source of truth around which you can read about the technologies that are being developed, how ready they are, how quickly they're progressing, who's working on them, so the related organizations, academia, startups, all of that data is tracked for the Sustainable Development Challenge here, but also in general in our backend. And this is a bit of the approach that we would like to offer to this community, and to figure out if there's enough shared interest in the participants here today to try doing something similar, again, for the space economy. And with that, so hopefully, so we're working on a few more fronts and a few more topics that are likely candidates to be upcoming platforms, but we're big believers in doing something around the space economy, and would very much like to figure out where that interest lies, and especially what kind of challenges that are faced in as a community that we are not privy to, that we're not looking at, because we're coming at this from a research and development perspective. It's a very, I want to say, a global approach, in the sense of we don't know, we're not sustainability experts the same way we're not space economy experts. What we know how to do is to identify, track, and make sense of these technologies. Primarily through this platform, but also through a few different other approaches. So what we're looking for within the group today is really who else is if this challenge makes sense, who else would be interested in participating in getting this off the ground, and start sharing insights around the technologies affecting how we reach the stars as a species. I'll drop a link to a web form in the chat together with the Technosector link in a second, and the QR code should be working as well. The web form is meant to start gathering the potential interest, again, around this challenge. And with that, again, I want to thank all of you for your attention, and again, thank Michael for getting us invited in this select group.
Happy to have you here, Michelle. Really appreciate your team. For the folks who don't know, he's got a team that's spread between Brazil, where he is, and Germany, and other parts of North Europe. I believe he's got an 18-person team. So this is a pretty interesting organization. I've known Michelle since almost the very beginning, maybe before the official beginning of Envisioning. So it's been amazing to kind of watch that evolution. So nice job to you and your team. So I'm going to ask a question that Michael Mealing posted, but before I do, I'm going to point out to Michael that Michelle and I have actually talked about your paper about market readiness before, and I think it's a really terrific overlap. So He's already been briefed on you, buddy. So I'm going to read the question. NASA and the Office of Science and Technology Policy have been asking the VC world over the past 3 years why we don't invest in advancing the TRL levels of technology that NASA needs. Our response is that market readiness matters far more than technology readiness. To demonstrate that, I wrote a paper on one way of doing market readiness levels, and he posted the link there. I've read his paper. It's a good paper. You should read it. And he asks, the question he asks is, does your framework have an equivalent market readiness level?
That's a great question. And I agree with the sentiment that technological readiness doesn't mean as much if there's no market and business preparedness for doing it. So on a concrete note, we've tracked both business readiness level and market readiness level. They're slightly different approaches for a particular project. In the past, we did a piece of work with the European Institute of Technology, their manufacturing branch in Spain, just last year. And there we looked at the delta between TRL and it's either BRL or MRL. Now it slips my mind which one we ended up using because we considered both. So 100%, it's something that we want to look at more extensively. We've only done it in a pilot for one complete set of technologies around manufacturing, and the framework is ready to be applied across the board. At the end of the day, it's sorry, I think that answers the question.
So, one of the reasons we brought you on board is, you're a space nerd, but you're not a space pro, right? I think that's a safe way of describing that, right? Okay. So one of the things that we brought you on board here for—
This is my, you can barely see it, but I have rockets literally behind me here. So.
Beautiful.
Behind the screen, yeah. So.
You are a nerd. Me too, man. We're speak the same language. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was, here we are, we're trying to develop the moon, right? That's the point of the Moon Society. That's the point of the Lunar Development Conference. But we don't really have a good handle on— I don't think we have a good handle on where we came from. We definitely don't have a good handle on the current state of the art. So it's really hard to make any sort of— I know you don't like the word predictions about the future, but it's hard to make assessments about the future if you don't have a good understanding of the current state of the art. And so in my view, that's what your platforms are doing, is they're enabling an understanding of the future by understanding where we currently are. Is that a safe way of assessing that?
Absolutely. So I think we felt there were two sort of low-hanging fruit that could be used in addressing the concern you're raising, which is how do you make sense of what's going on? I think the two low-hanging fruit we're working on, especially, are both TRL as one of the indicators of simply adding a number to the technology. We feel that's something every article or even gadget blog should be doing, because it's so difficult to make that distinction, right? So on one hand, that, and on the other hand, just putting the technologies into stories, give them color, give them context, put them into, and having that sort of bilateral, or that the approach where we can literally link a technology from within the story and have that be represented as metadata, we feel goes a long way to help people make sense, like just simply discern what's hype from what's real. And then to the point of prediction, I mean, we would love to do predictions. We do avoid it now because I think it's too fuzzy. But having data-driven predictions would be very different. And that's something I think that's what we're working towards. So simply tracking TRL over time and having, I think that gives you, that together with BRL, MRL, and other assessment methods as timestamp data should, that's a big hypothesis, but it should give us the ability to determine how, at least how quickly things are progressing. We get that, but also how they might unfold in the near future, comparing that to other fields, sectors, etc.
So first, I want you to put your screen back up, the one that shows the link to the web form, because there are more people on the various wild west of the internet video screens than there are attendees here. So I want to make sure they can see that. I don't expect anybody to type that out. That's going to be pretty challenging.
No, I'll do this though, for your, there we go. So that's a big, very clickable or very scannable QR code.
Thank you. Yeah. We've got, a couple hundred people out in the wild west of the internet, but fewer people are here. And I just want to make sure that, because you posted the text in the chat, which is great, but I wanted other people to be able to see that. So thank you.
Yeah, and if you're able to type this up, leave a note. If you find the URL by typing it in, we'll get you a special bonus prize. No, but sorry.
So, you're monitoring a bunch of different technologies, and your organization has tracked stuff for smart cities and a bunch of different use cases. About how many technologies are you tracking currently?
So we're breaking down technology into three distinct buckets. We have domains, which are the areas of research, things like AR, VR, IoT, even AI and ML. Like all of those are usually, we would never consider that a technology, but rather a field of research. We call it a domain. And then within each domain, we have what we call methods and applications. Method is how something is done. It doesn't really have TRL, and an application is what something's used for, and that really does have a TRL. So between those three buckets, only really applications have TRL. And we're tracking about 1,400 technologies of both methods and applications. In the Sustainable Development Platform, there's about 150 applications, I want to say, plus a number of methods. But on the back end, yeah, it's over 1,000.
And what you're looking for from the community at large is, how do we start tracking space-specific applications, space-specific technologies? Is that correct?
So there's no clear line between what's space-related and what isn't, right?
Super glad you said that. Super glad you said that.
So I think the framing is really around how ready something is for space is sort of the best hunch that I have in terms of, so any technology can be used in space, but of course it needs to be lighter and more robust. And there's all these constraints on what you actually want to use in space, not to mention the different resource use that you'll have out in orbit. So at the end of the day, what we really want to find with the community is identifying these indicators. Like, how can we look at our complete data set and say, how ready is this for space? How can we take 1,500 entries and create an assessment vector or metric that talks either about the space readiness or even quantifying things like weight or energy use? There are a lot of possibilities in how we can apply these tools. And again, we're by no means experts on this. So what we're doing is we're offering our experience and our tools for the community to figure out a way, hopefully to figure out a way how to pull this off together.
Well, in my opinion, the thing that differentiates what y'all do versus some other futurist style organizations is you have a very repeatable methodology, right? That you can use the same tools to evaluate different ideas, different technologies, and that gives you, I think that's a very powerful tool that could be leveraged for the space community. All right, Michelle, thank you very much. We really appreciate you having us here.